you will give me the 9.
Welcome back, everyone. It's Charlie. This will be my full Lord of the Rings, Rings of Power, Season 2, Episode 7 video. There were a whole bunch of Easter eggs and references. We're finally seeing the fall of Eregion these last 2 episodes, and the completion of the 9 rings for mortal men. So we'll break it all down. If you're brand new to the channel, be sure to subscribe to get all the episodes. Careful for spoilers if you haven't seen the episode yet. We'll start at the beginning, work our way through shot by shot, talking about Easter eggs, WTF moments, and book references. The episode title is Doomed to Die, a reference to the rest of the ring poem. They've been using the lines from the ring poem for the different groups of rings, like the elven rings at the beginning of the season, the dwarven rings from the ring poem during the middle of the season, and now the 9 rings part of the poem. 9 rings for mortal men doomed to die, 1 for the Dark Lord on his dark throne. That'll probably wind up being the title of one of the episodes at some point, or something similar to that. In the lands of Mordor, where the shadows lie. 1 ring to rule them all, 1 ring to find them, 1 ring to bring them all, and in the darkness bind them, in the lands of Mordor, where the shadows lie. So remember, the whole idea is that Sauron has forced Celebrimbor to finish creating the 9 rings for mortal men in this episode, but Galadriel takes off with them. It's only episode 7, we have 1 more episode left. At some point, those 9 rings have to wind up on 9 different people's hands in the next couple seasons. On top of that, Sauron has yet to create the 1 ring of power. There are a couple references to that later in the episode, but part of the idea that Galadriel talks about during the prologue of Fellowship of the Ring, the movies, she says Sauron deceived everyone, and that's a bit of a theme in the episode where Celebrimbor finally comes to his senses and starts confronting Sauron, saying that he's such a good deceiver that he's even deceived himself. But one of his greatest tricks that he pulls is that he never told anyone about his plans to create a master ring to control all the rings of power. Pretty much anyone from any of the races, any of the main characters on the show, are only worried about the rings that exist right now. They have no idea that there's going to be a 1 ring of power that will be able to control all of them. That feels like something that they're going to save for like late season 3, maybe even like season 4. Supposedly there's a 5-season plan. We'll see how they plot that out, because they're basically going to have to end the series, whichever season that winds up being, with the War of the Last Alliance. In charting the timeline, the way that they're doing the speedrun version of the books, I mean, they're changing a lot from the books, but they're also doing a really big speedrun version of it too. They'll show him finishing crafting the 1 ring of power at the beginning or like towards the middle of the final season. So there's still a lot that has to happen between now and the creation of the 1 ring of power. You still have the idea that he has to put those 9 rings on 9 different people's hands. He still has to make it to Numenor. There's a whole big plot there with the downfall of Numenor that hasn't even gotten halfway there yet. We didn't really deal with that in this week's episode, or what's happening in the east with the stranger and the halflings. So there's still a lot to wrap up before the end of this season. My early theory is that Season 3 will largely be the story of Sauron going around and putting those 9 different rings on 9 different people's hands, and we'll find out who the Nazgul wind up being. The title of the episode, Doomed to Die, also seems like a reference to Celebrimbor and Eregion just in general, because what's happening here is known in the books as the fall of Eregion, like it was always destined to happen. The opening scene starts with Celebrimbor still inside Sauron's much more powerful illusion in the forge, or around the forge, thinking that he's having a nice morning coffee, doing Iluvitar's work, like he's doing God's work, finishing these rings. We're gonna save Middle-earth. We get a montage of him forging the 9, and the music they set it to is a more ethereal, like a lighter version of Sauron's ring theme, Where the Shadows Lie. They've been playing it all season several times. Anytime Sauron shows up, anytime people talk about the rings, anytime they make any of the rings. Watch them release like a 10-hour cut on YouTube of ASMR of Celebrimbor just forging the rings. Last week, a lot of people were asking, where did Sauron get that bag of Mithril that he gave to Celebrimbor to finish the rings? Well, they answer later in this episode that it wasn't Mithril at all. It was also part of the illusion. It was just more of Sauron's black blood, like the goo that we saw at the beginning of the season. Part of the idea with the Valar and the Maiar is that people like Morgoth, for instance, way more powerful, actually poured his essence, like his power, into the planet, and that's why in present day of the Lord of the Rings, like throughout the Rings of the Power, like everything that happens after the first stage, after Morgoth is captured, why essentially bad things happen, why people are evil at all. It's all because Morgoth polluted the planet with his evil, metaphorically, but also literally. A really good example of this phenomenon is the black rot that you see in the Tree of Linden. You have to imagine a thing like that happening all over the planet on a low level. Morgoth was responsible for that largely. There's actually a lot of Morgoth lore that they dump in this episode. Sauron really goes on a tick about how he got tortured day and night, and he almost takes it to this weird masochistic place where he's like, I began to enjoy the torture. Like, what is going on here? You are getting freaky. Charlie Vickers, the actor, did a great job of portraying Sauron in this really cold, unfeeling, evil way. Like, he absolutely does not care at all about everyone's suffering all around him, particularly Celebrimbor. And he did a great job of showing you the depths of how crazy town banana pants Sauron is at this point. Like Celebrimbor says, you're so good at deceiving people, you have deceived yourself. Basically finding a way to justify all the evil things that Sauron, has been doing by making it seem like he's helping everyone, when really, obviously, that's not the case. But early in the episode here, before Celebrimbor fully figures out what's actually going on, he says part of the ring poem, 9 for mortal men. He said the thing inside the thing. Again, that's been a theme this season. Season 2, there's been many moments where people have either said the title of the show inside the show or things from other parts of the Legendarium inside the show. Really good example of that is when Sauron called him the Lord of the Rings. Obviously, that was a lie too, because Sauron is the real Lord of the Rings. Celebrimbor called the rings Rings of Power, literally the name of the show. The interesting thing, though, because we're talking about the 9 rings for mortal men, we talked about the dwarven rings a couple episodes ago. Originally, men and dwarves were not meant to get any of the rings. Originally, Sauron intended for all the rings to be worn by elves alone because they are immortal beings. This gets into the whole phenomenon that Bilbo Baggins talks about during the Lord of the Rings trilogy about how he feels like too much butter and jam scraped over bread, because what happens is one of the side effects of the rings, it's not meant to be a power of the ring, it's just a side effect of the rings. And it's all the rings of power, not just the one ring of power that Bilbo has. They extend their wearers' lives, but if you're an elf, you're immortal, you have unlimited life, so you don't really feel that effect. But if someone from the mortal races like Bilbo, Gollum, or one of the men wear them, any of the rings that they might be wearing do not give them more life. It just stretches out the life that they already have, like literally stretching them out over toast, making them feel thinner, like Bilbo says he feels thin to Gandalf, like his soul and his body both feel very thin. This is something that winds up happening to the 9 men that become the Nazgul. Over time, they literally just continue living until they fade away into the unseen realm. That's what would have happened to Bilbo or Gollum, for instance, if they would have continued wearing the one ring indefinitely. They would have just slowly faded into the unseen realm, but they've been pulled permanently into the unseen realm. But that doesn't happen to immortal beings, so that's why elves would have been immune to that. Part of the reason why Sauron changed his plan and decided to give rings to the other races is because he felt like it'd be easier to take over the planet, essentially. Part of the idea is that he's using the rings to sow discord amongst the different races so that they won't band together against him. We get a little bit of that later in the episode where you see him finger puppeting people, even people who aren't wearing the rings that are just in proximity to him. Like, that's how powerful he is, even in this weakened state after he's been killed once by Adar. Each time his body is destroyed, he's a little bit weaker, but at this point right here, he's still pretty close to 100% power levels. Part of the idea is that if he's ultimately successful and everybody's wearing their rings, all the different races are wearing all the rings, and he's wearing the one ring of power, he'd be able to finger puppet pretty much everybody on the planet this same way that he does to the guards here. That was why his master plan was power over flesh, not power of the flesh. Power over people's minds, not just their bodies, which is what Morgoth's plan was. His plan was mostly just to conquer the world the old way, just go around basically beating the crap out of everybody. After he failed to do that, Sauron basically tried to scramble and come up with a smarter plan, like work smarter, not harder, and that's where his plan to create the rings came from. Celebrimbor starts having more Sauron-induced hallucinations, making him think he's seeing crazy things or not seeing things. He starts to notice patterns, though. That's what the mouse is all about. Like, he notices the mouse is on a loop, so he starts to notice patterns in other things, like the candles don't burn, the fire in the forge doesn't die down ever. So that's how he slowly sort of wakes up to reality. Not fully, not until he actually goes outside and sees the battle itself happening, but at a certain point he realizes that he's been tricked. When he sees the dark, twisted version of himself in the mirror, that's as he appears in reality when the illusion falls out, like he briefly sees himself as he actually is right now. When Sauron asks him if he's fallen, that's a bit of a wink at Adar, as in fallen elf, like a dark elf almost. When they mention the secrets of the Rings song, that's actually Sauron's whispers that you hear anytime anyone gets really close to the rings. Like, a couple different people have actually heard the whispers coming from the rings. It's basically his spirit influencing the wearers, controlling their minds, because the rings themselves have their own low level of consciousness, especially the One Ring of Power, mostly because Sauron poured so much of his actual essence into the rings, literally in the case of the 9 and the One Ring of Power, but not in the case of the 3 rings for elves. In the way they depicted the creation of the Dwarven rings, he was able to influence their creation, but only slightly modify them. When it came to making the 9 rings, like, he literally just poured a ton of his blood into the rings. Like, they literally baked himself into the 9 rings. The same thing is going to happen when he forges the One Ring of Power. It's one of the reasons why Sauron could never ultimately be defeated until they destroyed the One Ring of Power, because so much of Sauron's life force was tied to the actual One Ring. That was why during Return of the King, when the ring is destroyed, he is ultimately destroyed. Like, they don't have to actually go up and, like, stab him or anything like that, or Gandalf doesn't have to zap him with any power. When they say the line, "all things must end," that's a reference to Sam and Frodo sharing the line when they threw the One Ring of Power into Mount Doom, or tried to, and technically it was Gollum stealing the One Ring and then falling into Mount Doom. So technically Gollum is the one that actually destroyed the One Ring. And even then, technically, that didn't kill him, it just destroyed his body to the point where he would never be able to reform himself into physical form. So he'd never be a threat to anyone on the planet ever again till, like, the end of days, the Dagor Dagorath, when Morgoth was prophesied to return, and they would have, like, this end of days kind of end of the world battle, and it would destroy the world, and then Iluvitar would remake the world, and it would be like Arda 2.0. There are a couple of references to that where Sauron talks about seeing quote-unquote the end. He calls it his end versus Morgoth's end, and what he's talking about is, like, literally the end of the planet, the end of the timeline. Part of the idea here too is that the end of all things here is the ultimate end of Celebrimbor and Eregion, because he doesn't survive a lot of what's happening during these events here. Like, he has to sacrifice himself to try and stall for time so that Galadriel can get away with the 9 rings. We get a couple early shots of Sauron walking around outside, seeing things as they are with the battle raging. Most of the city is already in ruins from the siege weapons. They begin to put enough smoke into the sky so the orcs can attack during the day. Notice that Sauron uses this as another opportunity to undermine Celebrimbor and convince everybody that he's gone total crazy town and to not listen to anything that he might say about me being Sauron. Whatever comes out of his mouth is a total lie. Believe me, the person who is definitely Anatar and totally not somebody else pretending to be Anatar. You also feel really bad for Mordania during this episode, R.I.P. She's so down bad for Sauron, like she's so caught up in his lies, she has no idea. When he says he'll see to it that she's duly rewarded when the time comes, that feels like he just plans to give her a quick death. Like, that's his version of a reward. Like, I will not torture you when the time comes. If you remember, Season 1 was like the end of him wanting to share power. He was trying to make Galadriel his queen, so to speak. Like, he didn't have romantic feelings for Galadriel, like he didn't want to get married to her or anything like that. But she was the only person that he briefly wanted to be his co-ruler / queen to rule the planet. After that, after she denied him, he basically gave up on that idea, and all he cares about now is just wielding all that power himself. He will not share power with anyone. That's also a line that's reiterated during the events of the movies, too. Gandalf basically tells Saruman, because Saruman wants the One Ring of Power himself, he's like, no, your master does not like to share power. The orcs then use the siege weapon in the nearby mountains to dam the river, allowing them to cross. If you wondered why that is, like, why can't they cross the river before this, is because orcs cannot swim. Not so great in the water. And if it seemed like the orcs are very well organized and very good at making war, that's because Adar is leading them, and you have to remember that he's basically the oldest elf on the planet next to Círdan the shipwright. So you basically have one of the greatest battle commanders on the planet that's living right now leading your army, so of course you're going to be way more organized than like a traditional army. Over in Khazad-dûm, Durin III goes even deeper into his madness because of the ring. Narvi turns against him, too, with the other workers, trying to remove it from his finger and help the Elves of Eregion with Durin IV, essentially installing Durin IV as the new reigning king. But they run into a bit of a hitch because the ring itself makes Durin III so powerful that he winds up killing most of the men that try to stop him. They tease the idea that Durin III is going to use the power that the ring gives him to start mining himself and will eventually wake the Balrog. Like, they talk about the creature that he's going to awake. Obviously, that's the Balrog. I don't know if this is something that I missed in an earlier episode, but I thought that the dwarves were unaware of the existence of the Balrog in Khazad-dûm. But apparently they know about what's going on with it. There's a brief reunion scene with Durin and Elrond, who are like the best friends in the entire world. Like, it's actually a pretty great reunion moment. When he calls him title-haired, I think that's also the show sort of winking behind the camera at Robert Arameo's curlier version of the Elrond hair, as opposed to Hugo Weaving's straight-haired Elrond from the movies. There are a lot of people that are like, how are they going to reconcile that? Like, will his hair just turn straight at some point when he goes to Rivendell and creates it? Which we will probably see in a future season. Like, we'll probably see Elrond making Rivendell in like season 3 or season 4 at some point. But at least at this part of the episode, Durin agrees to help the elves, like, you will have my axe. In the books, the dwarves did wind up helping the elves, but not till later in the timeline because, as you see later in this episode, the dwarves do not show up because they're worried about the Balrog. Like, if you take the army to help the elves, then who's going to protect Khazad-dûm from the Balrog if it shows up? Originally, their plan was to have the dwarves bring their mirrors and shine the sun on the orcs, basically roasting their entire army like meat on a fire. The only problem with this, a lot of people who have read the books are like, wait a minute, you're getting way too ahead of yourself here with the stuff that's happening in Khazad-dûm with the Balrog. In the books, the Balrog doesn't actually lay siege to Khazad-dûm and attack all of them till the Third Age, like much later in the timeline, so it's way too soon for the Balrog to start going crazy right now. If you remember though, Sauron saw the Balrog in the fire when he came to Khazad-dûm. That's because he knows that the Balrog is there, like he can sense that it's there. And he wants the dwarves to wake it so that it will just completely wreck the kingdom. All because Sauron wants the Balrog to serve him in his war to conquer the planet. The Balrogs were originally Morgoth's chief lieutenants next to Sauron. Like, Sauron just called the shots, so to speak. The Balrogs were like the real power that Morgoth wielded. When he wanted to get something done, he would send them out. So the idea that one of them is just chilling out in Khazad-dûm, Sauron really likes. Like, okay, I'm going to need that guy pretty soon. One of the other things you've noticed too from some of the other races is that most people do not like Sauron. Even the orcs, for instance, do not respect Sauron. Like, they hate Sauron. The only reason why a lot of these creatures were serving Morgoth, like for instance the Balrogs, is because Morgoth was so powerful. It's basically the reason why Sauron continued to serve him too, because at a certain point, Sauron didn't want to have anything to do with him either. As he explains, every time he displeased him, Morgoth would torture him. That's how powerful he was, that he could torture Sauron. Later in the episode, Adar says that he's trying to prevent Sauron from taking control of his orcs and just abusing them. Part of the idea is that Sauron can't really do that until he has the One Ring of Power. Once he has that, then everybody will start to be afraid of him the way they were afraid of Morgoth. Then we get Celebrimbor confronting Sauron over the truth of the matter, and he reveals himself to him. When he says he's the person trying to keep the storm at bay, what he's talking about is the theoretical return of Morgoth. Like, Sauron is afraid of Morgoth coming back. His whole thing is creating a lasting order on Middle-earth, but the thing is that it's his very evil order, kind of like a Darth Vader sense of order, lawful evil. He will crush you with his order. We see the illusion break when he throws Feanor's hammer through the window. He sees what the battle is going on outside. Note to self, someone pick up that hammer before it's all over, because that's a priceless heirloom. Really love Celebrimbor's performance during all this. The actor did a great job. And notice how Charlie Vickers' performance as Sauron goes down during this. Just completely cold and uncaring. He just kind of lets Celebrimbor break down there in front of him. He absolutely does not care about anything that's happening. All he wants him to do is finish the 9 rings. Are you done yet? Are you done with the 9 rings? When he reveals that Celebrimbor inadvertently baked his own blood, like his black goo essence, into the 9 rings, that's also meant to foreshadow what he does when he creates the One Ring of Power, basically pouring a ton of his essence into the ring, literally.
I have learned so much from you. True creation requires sacrifice.
And into this ring, he poured his cruelty, his malice, and his will to dominate all life.
So if it wasn't clear, they're trying to say that Sauron got the idea for the One Ring of Power, how to really make it work, from his work with Celebrimbor. Like, Celebrimbor gave him the idea, the whole idea that the One Ring of Power would not work unless he literally sacrificed himself by like putting his body, his essence, into the ring itself. That was what the whole line was about. True creation requires sacrifice. So the ultimate creation, like we're talking about the One Ring of Power, requires the ultimate sacrifice. Then we see the unfortunate death of Mordania, R.I.P. Sauron uses his power to trick them one more time, making it seem like Celebrimbor is the one that pushes her off the wall, and basically tells him straight up that he'll spare the city. Also a lie here, he can't do that because technically Adar will destroy the city in trying to get Sauron if he finishes the 9, which he agrees to do. When he says he's going to create a perfect and lasting peace, obviously that's meant to be his domination over the world, not just over everyone in general, but over everyone's minds in their thoughts. He will control everyone's thoughts, finger puppeting the entire planet. The only people that are supposed to be immune to the effects of the Rings of Power, like the One Ring of Power, are like the other Valar in Valinor. Then Elrond and Gil-galad's forces ride in to charge the orcs, who reveal that they have Galadriel to get them to back off. It becomes a bit of a war of words, which is actually more to Elrond's liking, like he's a diplomat, like he's used to actually negotiating with people like this. Adar is still trying to get Galadriel's Ring of Power, wanting to use it in combination with Morgoth's crown to kill Sauron. We know that won't work the way he thinks it will, but we also know from the books, because we've seen everything that happens after this in the timeline, that ultimately Adar will not be successful. Adar then drops some elven lore on Elrond, telling him some Silmarillion history, his great-grandmother Melian, who was a Valar, basically saying that she was very wise, very beautiful, and you look kind of like her. She was the wife of Thingol, king of Doriath, during the First Age. The interesting twist and how this sort of ties back to Elrond and his friendship with Durin IV is that Thingol died as a result of a bitter feud with the dwarves of his area over the Noglamir, a necklace made with both dwarven and elven partnership that had a Silmarillion in it. Those dwarves are not the same dwarves from Khazad-dûm, but they ambushed and eventually killed him. And now in present day, you have Elrond, who's like best friends with the future king of the dwarves in Khazad-dûm. But you have to remember that there are 7 different groups of dwarves, so he's just friends with the dwarves in Khazad-dûm. The reason why Adar remembers Melian's beauty and wisdom is because he saw her during the First Age, as he is one of the oldest living elves on the planet. Like I said, he's part of the first group of elves that awoke on the planet and were captured by Morgoth before the Valar found the elves. So Adar is about the same age, maybe just like a tiny bit older than Círdan the shipwright, making him basically the oldest elf on the planet. He's basically like a living, walking library of history. Later in the episode, he also mocks Elrond for forgetting some of his elven lore because one of Elrond's jobs is essentially a lore master in addition to being a diplomat. The cruelty that Adar says his bravest orcs endured is meant to be a reference to the tortures experiments that Morgoth then Sauron put them through. Elrond challenges him to single combat, but that's just a bit of a play to stall for time so that he can actually cozy up to Galadriel and give her a tool to escape with. That was what the kiss was about. Like, people are like, why is he kissing Galadriel? This seems kind of tender. No. That was just to distract everyone in the room so they wouldn't see him passing that little tool to Galadriel. I don't know if Elrond has been married at this point, but eventually Elrond winds up marrying Galadriel's daughter, so Galadriel is canonically Elrond's mother-in-law. Maybe we'll see that in a future season at some point. Supposedly Galadriel's husband, Celeborn, also exists somewhere inside Rings of Power. We just haven't seen him on the show yet. Back at Khazad-dûm, Durin IV gives a rousing speech like a king would because he's going to be the future king, and talks about Sauron dropping some more lore. When he calls him Sauron the Stoneheart, stealing secrets from their forebears, what he's talking about is Sauron used to be apprenticed to Aule, the smith who created the dwarves, just like Fëanor was apprenticed to Aule. That's why Fëanor became the greatest smith in the history of the planet next to Aule. So the idea is that Sauron was basically an apprentice smith to the Valar until Morgoth turned him evil and he turned to his side. Notice now in the episode, Sauron has chained Celebrimbor to his desk, watching him finish the 9 personally, like he's just hovering over him, waiting for him to finish minute by minute, like, are you done now? Are you done yet? Are you done yet? There are a couple moments in the orcs' encampment when they start to question Adar's intentions because Adar is so obsessed with destroying Sauron, he's willing to get all these orcs killed if it means getting Sauron. Later in the episode, you see him crying over the caskets of some of the dead orcs, so that does confirm that he does care about them, like he is truthful when he says what heart he has left does beat for them. But I think that's also meant to make Galadriel sympathize a little bit more with him, like she sympathizes because what Sauron has done to him, what Morgoth has done to him. But I think what they're trying to set up here is the idea that Sauron will be the one to ultimately kill Adar in revenge for killing him at the beginning of the Second Age. Arondir shows up to help save Galadriel, but he's actually really there to kill Adar, and she convinces him otherwise. Like I said, I think it'll be Sauron to be the one to actually kill Adar. We get a bunch of great scenes of Celebrimbor and Sauron. They really want Celebrimbor to go out like a boss just because he spent all season being finger puppeted left and right, being played like a fiddle by Sauron. Sauron claims that he was treated just as badly by Morgoth and then goes into this big diatribe about how he was tortured. Like I said, he gets super freaky in that part of the episode, like, wait a minute, what are you talking about here? But if it wasn't clear from his speech here, part of the idea is that Sauron was actually just as happy to see the Valar defeat Morgoth as anybody else. Like, he did not want Morgoth around. He was so afraid of him. He got tortured all the time. He wanted him gone. Then he talks about the Dagor Dagorath, talking about seeing the end clearly. Basically, the end of all things is what he means, seeing the end of the timeline. When he says he saw the end since he awoke, that's when he literally awoke before the creation of the universe. This is when the Ainur were created by Iluvitar. There are a couple of times during season 1 where he references point in history where he talked about the breaking of the first silence when they all started singing, basically bringing everything into creation. He mentions Morgoth's wish to destroy all the things that the Valar and Iluvitar created on the world, all their works. That was basically Morgoth's mission, to reshape the world in his own image because he couldn't create his own world. But even Celebrimbor senses that Sauron has gone completely crazy town banana pants. He winds up using one of his tools in the ring presses here to cut off his own finger so that he can squeeze his hand outside of the lock. Whose will is the stronger? Like I said, they really want to give him some heroic moments to go out on just because he felt like such a tool all season. He then stalls Sauron for time so that Galadriel can get away with the 9, but like I said, eventually we have to meet the 9, the Nazgul, so those rings are going to wind up on 9 different humans' hands at some point next season. I haven't really talked about the actual battle scenes. A lot of great battle scenes, they do action real well. The show itself, for all the complaints that people levy against it, it actually looks visually great. They really wanted this episode to feel a lot like Helm's Deep, same basic vibe. Adar then sends his Hulk, Damrod the Hill Troll, in to wreck everyone, including a lot of orcs, as they're worried about too. He'll kill our own. We don't care. I wanted to destroy the city.
And Hulk. Smash.
Celebrimbor then says Sauron's hand will never touch another ring again. We know that's not true because not only does he get some of the rings himself back, but he also makes the one ring of power, putting it on his hand. I already explained how his power of mind control here works against the other elves. Once he gets the one ring of power on his hand and the other rings are on everyone's hands, he can do this to almost everybody on the planet. There's a couple great fight scenes between Elrond and Damrod the Hill Troll, who's able to break the wall just enough to allow the orcs to enter and lay waste to the city. So R.I.P. to Eregion. This is the fall of Eregion. But they do let Elrond take him down. And notice the smile, the chuckle that he goes out on, because Damrod is kind of impressed that Elrond did, hey, that's actually pretty good of you. I wasn't expecting you to be able to kill me. But also he's laughing darkly because he knows that he was successful in breaking the wall and he knows the orcs are going to destroy the city. Then they really want to go out on a downer Empire Strikes Back kind of ending because Elrond sees both of the dwarves are not coming and they have almost no forces left. So Adar just walks up and takes Galadriel's ring of power from him, which they foreshadowed earlier in the episode, basically saying that ultimately that's what would happen, making it seem like all hope is lost. But remember, Adar does not really exist later in the timeline as far as we know. He has Sauron's crown, and we know that Sauron's going to be wearing that later in the timeline. So ultimately, no matter what Adar has in terms of power, Sauron will kill him and take his crown back. In probably his greatest fear, he will enslave all the orcs. That was the one thing that Adar did not want to happen. They end the end credits with a heavy metal theme song that they wrote for season 2. It's called The Last Battle of Damrod in the soundtrack because he was killed by Elrond. So it's basically Damrod's war theme music. Really hardcore way to go out in an episode before the finale. There are a bunch of Easter eggs and references. If there's anything you spotted in the episode that I didn't talk about in the video, just write them below in the comments. My full episode 8 finale video will post next week after they release it. There's a bunch of stuff happening right now. Click here for my Agatha All Along episode 3 video. They went full Mephisto. You never go full Mephisto. And click here for all my Rings of Power episodes. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next one.